going to go do it. We'll know where it is forever. So welcome, everybody. It looks like it's 8:02, and I think it's probably a good time to get started. It's been really wonderful the first few minutes as we've been waiting to get started to see old friends and such, and lots of folks knowing each other and connecting and such. But I would encourage you, if you're comfortable with it, to use the chat to put your name and association in and just say hey to each other if you'd like to. It's just sort of a nice way of keeping things a little bit interactive. My name is Rick Catronio. I'm the Executive Director for ACHENA, now for a handful of months, had been associated with ACHENA previously. But I'm really happy to be here and to help sort of pull this session together. As I said, you know, we are recording. The title of this session this evening is, can you all see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Educational Standards and Practice Competencies for the Professional Practitioner of Homeopathy in North America. This is our release webinar. It's very exciting, actually. This represents the completion of a really important piece of work for our community. And we're really glad to be able to share that work with everyone, to raise awareness of work that's been done and to highlight it. And I'm really grateful that along with me, we have a wonderful panel of folks, all of whom participated on the Final Deliberation Committee. And I think what I'd like to do now is give everybody, maybe in the order of your name on the slide, give everybody an opportunity to just introduce themselves. I know lots of us know each other already, but it's a good thing to do just for the sake of our group as a whole. So Karen, and then we'll just keep going down the list.
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Allen, and I, like some of you, I was actually part of the original S&C. There's some of us with gray hair, you know, who have been in this for a long time. And it's been wonderful to see it come through the process that it's come through. And I'm now the president of ACHENA. Lauren, tag you're it.
Okay. So I'm Lauren Fox. I am a practitioner and educator, and definitely a stakeholder in wanting to see this document be the best it can be. I have been on this deliberating committee as a representative of the American Institute for Homeopathy.
And I am Tanya Kell, the current president of the North American Society of Homeopaths, and very much committed to homeopathy being a distinct profession. And I'm grateful that we are creating the foundation on which that can stand. So having a independent standards and competencies document is a big part of showing the rest of the world that we are truly a profession and that we are capable of self-improvement and self-regulation.
Nicely put. And
Sheila?
I'm Sheila Porter-Smith. I represent the CHC in this committee. And I also, as Tanya said, feel very strongly about having strong standards and competency requirements for the practice of homeopathy so that we can move towards being recognized by professional corporations so that we can be reimbursed for what we do in our practice. Thank you.
And as I said, I'm Rick Catronio. I'm the current executive director for ACHENA, and I served as the staff person, sort of the worker bee for this committee. I was not a voting member of the committee, but I did do a fair amount of the lifting of things, the actual text work and such. And I'm really glad that for the sake of this presentation, I have this wonderful panel. We'll be sharing different parts of the presentation. I'll get things started, and then we'll turn stuff over sequentially to different presenters. We're still getting folks joining, which is terrific. So I'm just going to take a second to let people in. For folks who just entered, I just want you to know that we are recording this session, just for the sake of full disclosure. we're going to go through this presentation, which is about 20 slides, and then we'll have time for question and answers a little bit later. If you think that there's a chance that you're going to have noise in the background, I would encourage folks to mute themselves. We love seeing people's faces if you're comfortable staying on camera. There we go, on cue. I will say that some of my favorite elements of the last couple of years in working remotely has been to meet people's children and pets and see cattails and dogs and all that stuff. And so we recognize that we're in everyone's living rooms or offices and such, so it's all good. But if you mute, that's helpful. So let's talk about the objectives of this webinar. Essentially, our process of refining this document at this point is complete. And so the purpose of this webinar tonight is really to promote awareness of the release of this 3rd edition. We'd like to talk about the process that we followed for updating the document. We're going to review each of the different comments that we received and talk about what we did when we interacted with those comments and review some key areas of the updated document. So those are our objectives for this evening. So the S&C document, for short, is used by educators to think about curriculum. It's used by ACHENA in our work with school accreditation. It's a guide, perhaps, to CHC in its work with practitioner certification. And as Tanya alluded, most importantly, perhaps, it's a statement to the public and to other professional organizations, to insurers or to healthcare practices, health systems, to the world of what our profession is and what we stand for. I think it's really important to point out that while the voice for this document that you may have seen publicly is ACHENA sort of saying like, hey, this is happening, we have the public comment process hosted on our website. This is not an ACHENA document. This belongs to our entire community, not to any one organization. It was really important that we had really good representation, particularly on the deliberation committee, across all of our, across most of our national organizations. So this is not an ACHENA document. Can't say that enough, can't stress it enough. It belongs to the community and to not any one organization. I would also encourage folks, as we're talking throughout this webinar, if questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll take those questions at the end of the presentation, but as things occur to you, if you want to put them in the chat, please feel free and we'll take a peek at them when we get to the end. So one of the things that we did in this new version of the S&C document is to clearly define educational standards and competencies. It's such the building block of the whole work, but previously we really never defined them. So what I tried to do in this presentation on the slides, you see key terms and it says page 5, 6. I just added those references so that folks, if you wanted to go find any of this stuff in the actual S&C document, you would know where to find them. So, in reference to pages 5 and 6, we defined educational standards as the established criterion and specified requirements that must be met and maintained by an educational program. So educational standards have to do with what schools do, what educational programs do, to ensure student achievement in a particular field of study. Competencies, on the other hand, are the domain of the individual practitioner. And competencies are something that should be able to, a graduate should be able to achieve consistently and with proficiency in order to enter professional practice. And I do want to say that our deliberations committee was really, really fortunate to have Sue Rowe participate as a panel member. This is an area of interest and expertise for her particularly, and she was especially helpful in some of the work that the committee did. Next slide. One of the sets of comments that we got really asked us to define the history of the document and to describe the level of participation in this particular set of revisions. So I'm going to go through that in the next couple of slides. So as Karen alluded when she was introducing herself, back in 2000, there was a summit. That summit had 11 representatives, and resulted in the release of the first version of this document in 2001. The second edition was initiated with a summit in 2010. There were 15 representatives, and there was a period of 3 years between the release of that. I personally became involved with the public comment process for that. Must have been in 2012 to 2013. And this edition, which of course happened during COVID, which changed a lot of our lives, included the work of a steering committee and 3 work groups that were established in 2021. It included participation of 25 representatives and was released in 2022. So this was, I guess you would say that it took us less time than one previous edition and more time than another of the previous editions. But this is essentially the history, and we're trying to really highlight the number of representatives involved in the process in this slide. Next, oops, sorry about that. So the 2021-2022 process started with a steering committee that we'll talk about in a little bit. That steering committee put out a call to action that established 3 work groups. That the work groups and the steering committee prepared an updated draft. That updated draft was put out for public comment for several weeks. Then the deliberations committee reviewed the updated draft along with all of the comments that were submitted, and spent, let's see, we started our work in June. So it was June, July, August, September. So it was 4.5 months or so of work on our part, going through those comments very carefully, considering the previous draft and what was in the intent of the folks that created the previous drafts, cleaning up the document, really trying to streamline the document, and then arriving at a final document. So that was our process. It was released on October 7th. And we wanted to give folks a little bit of time to review it before we did this evening's review, because we felt like you should have some time before we talk you through it. The documents that were released on October 7th included the third version of the document itself, the Educational Standards and Practice Competencies for the Professional Practitioner of Homeopathy in North America. And here is the link to the document on the ACHENA website. And it also included a summary of comments and deliberations or revisions that essentially was, our report out to the world about the comments that we received and what we did with them. So a little bit more conceptual overview, so that when you were looking at the document itself, you could see what we did. So in the comments and deliberations document, we listed 2 appendices. The first appendix listed the steering committee members, which we put here. So Alistair Gray and Anava Keel from ACHENA, Jared Coggins and Julie Mann from NASH, Randy Fruchter and Ann McKay from CHC, Sharam and Kathy Zimmerman were additional members of the steering committee. The deliberation committee included Karen, Lauren, Sheila, and Tanya, who are on this call, and also Mike Knapp from HANP, and Sue Rowe, who I mentioned previously. So these were the folks that were kind of involved, the steering committee in preparing the initial draft that went for public comment, and the deliberation committee that was that had the opportunity to review the public comments and then share this version of the document. So that's the background. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren now, who is going to talk about the nature of the public comments that we received.
Myself there. So firstly, I would like to thank all of those who put tireless hours into crafting this document, and those who took the time to read it and make comments. Your commitment, everyone's commitment to this process is very notable and admirable. I believe that this document, which lays down the foundation for homeopathic practice in the U.S., is much improved due to the work of many. And I think we all should be pretty pleased with it. So after it was released, and there were either 8 individuals or groups of individuals that made comments. The bulk of the comments fell into about 10 key themes or categories. And there were minor comments that were easily addressed throughout the revision process, but did not fall into these 10 key themes. So right here on this slide, these are the 10 themes that came up. The need to overall improve the organization and clarity of the document, which I believe has really clearly made huge progress with. To include information about the process for updating the S&C document and who participated. Rick's already addressed some of those things. Include a section to address the history of the document and future considerations, as did the previous version. Clearly state the purpose of the document as a guide for education and competencies of the professional practitioners. Focus solely on professional homeopaths, include more focus on the certified classical homeopath, and as a standard for the profession, and remove reference to other types of non-professional practitioners. Remove the section on risk management. The next theme was inclusion or removal of addressing social determinants of health and social justice issues. To update the current political legal environment. Content which was presented as opinion and not standards or competencies. I think that would be eliminated. Do not support requiring schools to teach use of technology, and too many additional topics will make it impossible to address within the 1,000-hour program range. So now we're going to, the rest of the committee is going to address each one of these themes from the commenters and share the changes that were actually made in the document.
So the actions that we took, and again, I want to echo what Lauren said, it was a slog to get through that document, and hats off to everybody who read it, and especially those of you who read it in teams, who worked together with each other, trying to figure out how, what exactly does this mean? What are the implications of it? How should this be the same or different than in the past? There was a lot of thought that went into all those comments that came to us. And so the deliberation committee looked at how do we do that. One of the other challenges was that we are a diverse community in terms of being multidisciplinary with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different styles and attitudes. And so some of the comments were actually completely opposite of each other. And we were trying to thread the needle with honoring the traditions of what was in the earlier versions and also attending to the feedback that we were given. One of the things when people asked, can you organize this and clarify it? We tightened up languaging, particularly Sue Rowe was very helpful about saying, how would this be stated as a standard? How would this be stated as a competency instead of something that sounds like an opinion or a we're talking about? So there was a lot of that. People had said that when they saw the initial document, there were track changes set up in it, which had made it difficult to follow and read. And that also gave us ideas about how this should be done in future versions, to not have people have to slog through all of that. There were places where, for clarity in the past, the same thing had been basically put in multiple places. And so we drew those in to make things more streamlined and to eliminate repetitions. And then we did a lot of proofing and checking, taking out typos, taking out misstatements. And we actually took 20 pages out of the document. It went from 112 pages to 92 pages. The next request that came in on a comment was that we put in information both about the history and about the update process. Because this is a document that belongs to the whole community, it's important that the whole community both understands and participates and helps guide this process for updating. So we put in a description, pages 4 through 10 in the document, if you're following along, that says, how did all this happen? And then we also put in there what the steps are, step by step, for the update process. And at the end of our discussion today, we'll also be talking about next steps and when the next update might be, so that everybody kind of has a continuity through history behind us and out in front of us. The next part was to focus solely on professional homeopaths. You know, this is not a standard in competencies, even though the AIH was involved, the HANP were involved on the deliberation communities. The naturopaths have their standards and competencies, and the nursing community and the docs, those other licensure parts of our multidisciplinary profession have their own. And so this is really focused on the people who are getting a CCH credential. And there was also a request that we remove. There was some of the content about non-professional education in homeopathy. And so we streamlined and adjusted that. We also changed the title back to follow what had been previous, instead of having the title include non-professional use of homeopathy. We went through some information in the introduction about the current status of homeopathy as an emerging profession and about the CCH credential there. And we also felt that it was important to include information about what levels of study make the difference between self-care and professional practice, and what credentials exist in our profession. So we added an appendix that says this is the CCH credential, the HANP credential, the ABHT, and laid out some of those pieces in a more clear way. There was a lot of discussion about risk management, and the original intent was to really clearly define scope of practice to make that more clear for our community as an emerging profession. And rather than include more detail about that in the S&C document, we emphasized that this is included in the CHC Code of Ethics and other professional expectations. And we did add, based on some of the comments, some commentary about if you are going to be a professional practitioner who is educating for home care, that should be done in a responsible and appropriate way. And that's in the document, pages 48 to 50, if you want to dive in there and review that. We also acknowledge that schools have many different styles of practice, ways that they teach, and We strengthened throughout the document a focus on classical homeopathy. And while the schools have many different contemporary theories that they teach, they need to be acknowledging that there is this core of classical, this kernel of information that is the foundation of all of those later theories. And so we focused on that in the standards and competencies. And one other thing that came up as a fairly far-reaching discussion, especially post-pandemic, is what do we do about distance learning and telehealth? And we, based on comments and based both that were submitted and within the deliberation community, we really wanted whatever level of inclusion of technology that any school decided was right for them and for their group of students and for their clinical resources. We just wanted them to follow best practices for whatever it is that they are doing. And some schools have no online anything and no telehealth anything. And because it is likely that any graduating student will work at some point in some kind of a telehealth setting, we wanted to have students have the opportunities to observe that or to participate in it if that's what your school does. And to leave the onus of deciding what is right for each school, with the recommendation that they continue to review and see over time as things unfold, what's the best for our teaching program and for our community, always following best practices. And now I'm going to pass the baton to Tanya to carry on with some of our other discussions.
Right. So a new inclusion in this document was the social determinants of health and the effect of the society on epidemics, general health, large populations. As we know, Samuel Hahnemann was very much dedicated to public health, and it needs to be part of our awareness as homeopaths. So people thought that this was a partisan political statement. It is not. It is a humanitarian statement that we need to understand the society and the people within the society and how the structure of our society impacts their health. And so we want to unify the homeopathy community around ensuring access to high quality, unprejudiced homeopathy education and services. We want to raise awareness about removing barriers to access for all. We've clearly defined our rationale for doing this. And then I believe as a well-rounded and competent practitioner, you should be able to see how being unbiased in your analysis of the society around you is going to assist you in being unbiased in your case-taking analysis and management. That it's an important development in being a true practitioner of the healing art.
Tanya, do you want to continue with the next slide?
Sorry, I accidentally hit the mute button. So professional homeopaths are best equipped to develop a thriving practice when they can engage in self-reflection. So we do it all the time. You know, why didn't I find the remedy in that case? Why am I having trouble with this client? Where's the energy stuck? And so this is just part of your everyday practitioner development. What dynamics am I participating in? Where are my blind spots? So providing non-judgmental affirming services to assist people of all races, ethnicities, religions, sexual orientations, and genders in fully realizing their highest potential in life is in line with the teachings of Hahnemann and the Organon. And every other professional medical association has statements on this. And I hope that we will make more than just a statement, that we will really mean it, because a lot of times the statements are simply perfunctory and we want to be authentic. So political legal environment is changing rapidly due to the influx of great interest in homeopathy, both in tearing it down and building it up. Our visibility is huge due to the internet, and that's great. But it's also something that needs to be curated carefully. Homeopathy is not mainstream thought, and people bring their ignorance and prejudice with them into our profession. And we as the elders kind of have to have a basis on which to mentor them into what homeopathy is really about. So in order to protect this growing profession, Nash commissioned a thorough study and report on the political and legal environment of homeopathy throughout North America. And we'll be having a release webinar about that next month as well. And I invite people to look at it and read it. And we want to make sure that all practitioners have a safe practice so that they can thrive. And then I want to hand it back to Karen as well, who keeps a good eye on the pulse of this as well.
Okay. So for future revisions and updates, there was discussion about specific management of acutes. Do we need standards and competencies around particular subsets? Most of the standards and competencies is around the day-to-day work of chronic care. So is there an opportunity for the creation of something with acute care, or a subset that is particularly appropriate to one of our other multidisciplinary profession siblings, like chiropractors and massage therapists, who would greatly benefit from information specifically about what are the skills, what are the standards and competencies that would be needed in a musculoskeletal focused practice. About the idea of integration of homeopathy into acupuncture practice. There are several states where if you are a licensed acupuncturist, then that gives you the legal basis for a homeopathic practice in a non-health freedom state, for example, in Florida. So we looked at is there a way that would be beneficial? Would it be useful to have information in the standards and competencies about contemporary systems versus that core of classical homeopathy that is the foundation of everything contemporary and later, or for other specific areas or approaches to practice? Is there purpose for any of that? I think that's a good question for us to be looking at the next time around. And then also to consider, do we need to establish some kind of process for non-professional homeopaths? This has been a big discussion point over this past year, with some very legitimate concerns about what average home consumers are being taught by various and sundry practitioners, some of which is far outside of the realm of self-care. And so is there a way for us to look at defining standards and competencies for home use of homeopathy? And then again, emphasizing that this document belongs to the community, and beginning to plan now to say, when are we going to update this again? To review what is the process? Does that process need to be modified? Are there any other ways in which we should be refining this as we go forward? Rick, do you have anything you want to add to all of that?
No, I think that was terrific, Karen. So as far as next steps go, as we talked about the purpose of the document, Certainly, it has relevance to ACHENA as an accrediting body, to CHC as a credentialing body. And so we wanted to just talk for a couple minutes about that. I'm going to talk about the ACHENA side of things, and Sheila, I think, is going to pipe in a little bit relative to the CHC side of things. But ACHENA has already started a process of reaching out, particularly to schools, to create a work group that would work with our existing standards committee to look at how the updated standards and competencies document should inform ACHENA's Standard 8, which has to do with the program of study. And we will, work closely with schools, CHC, professional organizations, state societies, as we translate the S&C document into our accreditation standards. This will include a public comment process. So we'll do the same process again with the revisions to the ACHENA Standard 8. We will republish those for public comment, leave that open for a period of time, receive comments, and then ACHENA will review those comments and come up with a new set of accreditation standards particular to Standard 8, which is the program of study. And the next review of the S&C, we tried to put it right on the cover of the document that should be in 5 years. We outlined a process that we followed essentially for the last couple of cycles, but tried to articulate it more clearly so that folks could understand the process and anticipate it, in hopes of, really like continuing to increase the participation in the process. I think if you look at the numbers of people involved from the first to the second to the third, we have continued to grow the community of people involved in the process. The only thing I would say is, like, this round, we probably had fewer public comments than we did in the previous round, but the comments that we received were very extensive. So that was good. We want to continue to grow participation in this process. And I think there, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, if you want to add anything relative to CHC. Sheila, you might have to mute.
Yep, I got it. So CHC next steps are going to have to do with reviewing the Code of Ethics, the CHC Code of Ethics, to reflect any of the revisions in this document. And then with the next job analysis that takes place, we will incorporate the S&C revisions. This would be for entry-level professional homeopaths. And then finally, we will incorporate the S&C revisions into the exam items to reflect any of the social justice issues. Primarily, I think, is one place that needs to be looked at. So that's about it for us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, panel. Excellent job. I'm going to stop sharing the screen with my slides. And I will invite folks to, if you want to share a comment or a thought, to unmute yourself and then do so. I will also be looking at the chat if folks want to chat in. I think the timing was perfect. We have 20 minutes left and plenty of time for discussion. So feel free. I don't see anything in the chat as far as questions go.
There's also a button to raise your hand if you just want to speak.
This is sort of that moment, like when you're in a case with somebody new and they sit down and you say, "So how can I help you?" And they're gathering their thoughts. You hope they're gathering your thoughts and you're doodling on your piece of paper and the time stretches out.
I would just say that I think we all recognize that this document probably isn't perfect, that it is a work in process. I would say that we recognize that our community is diverse and there's a wide variety of opinions and thoughts. and the deliberation committee did our very best to try to respect all of those perspectives and weave them together in a way that we're hoping that as a community we can all embrace. And I look forward to continuing this work, in a handful of years, in 5 years, and continuing to make this the very best document that we can.
Just want to say that I'm really grateful for everyone who was involved in this document, and you guys have done such a wonderful job in deliberating and coming up with this close to final document. So really, thank you. I know it's an enormous task, and I think each one of you recognized the congratulations and a big thank you from all of us.
Yeah, and for those folks who started with the working groups at the beginning of this process last year, they slogged along for a long time, refining and considering. That early work in those working groups was really dogged. And I think we owe all of those folks a debt of gratitude, as well as all those folks who read through the document multiple times and gathered comments. Yeah.
Let me just say congratulations to all of you. You did a good job. I mean, not only did you spend all that time, I can see the revisions and the rewording. As was said before, this is good for everyone. It's hard being a homeopath by yourself when nobody even knows what homeopathic medicine is. And I think things are changing. What we're seeing out there is almost is very scary. And this is great. I mean, you did a good job. We do have some questions to be clarified. There's still a few smoky places when you get to the standard 8. How many clinical training hours is on one place you say, 30 cases, and another place it's something else, and this kind of thing. So it's not quite totally spelled out, but for the most part, I think you did a heroic job. And from my position, thank you all, and good work. It's not easy.
Oh, really? I didn't know that was unclear, because I thought from the beginning it was always 500 hours of clinical training.
500 hours, yes, but in one section it says 30 cases, 10 of which the student has to take while being supervised. So, I guess the question is, if you have 3 students, you're looking at 30 cases. Each of the 3 students taking 10 cases, which means if we're looking at, just a quick calculation, 3 students, 10 cases each, being with the student for the entire time. So now you're looking at 30 cases for the 3 students, at least 2 hours a case. There's 60 hours, plus the write-ups, plus the follow-ups, etc. We're looking at a huge bite. So you start saying, okay, I've got 10 students that have to do 10 cases each. You're looking at a couple of 100 hours easy for someone, a professional practitioner to be with them. So it's not quite, or at least my opinion is that I muddled through it a few times trying to understand exactly how that's working. So we may be looking at a lot of man hours for that.
But this is good, Maria. Because I think that the way this functions, right, is that we start with the S&C document. This informs the ACHENA accreditation standards, which are specific to the schools. And we have a process now ahead of us where we can take what's been outlined in the S&C and refine it and flesh it out a little bit, really, in
Yeah.
the ACHENA accreditation standard. So these are exactly the kinds of issues I think that we want to flag so that we can have as much clarity as possible.
Yeah.
as we move forward.
And
But
these
thank
are
you.
the kind of issues that our College of Accredited School group needs to look at, because it's our job to provide this. And what is the best way to train a student to become a practitioner? And, you know, just as we're doing it from a school level, we're seeing what's working and what's not working and where we're getting, if I want to say, the biggest bang for the buck. How much progress can I get from our students holding a clinic this way or having it this way? You know, how many students can watch? What is the, if you want to say, the learning curve? What kind of group of students, beginners, advanced, et cetera, can we mix together so that we can bring these students farther ahead? And I think just saying each student has to be supervised through X number of cases, blah, 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 and X number of times might be a little bit too rigid to be able to even implement some of that.
Right. So as the educators problem solve, they could share that with us and we can adjust the document.
Yeah.
Right, and come be in the working committee. Come be in the working group, Maria, and bring those thoughts and comments and help us problem
Yeah.
solve.
Happy to try to do that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think ACHENA's goal is to provide a big tent with some basic standards that provide each of the schools with the latitude to implement this in a way that makes sense for the specific school's culture and practice and community, while at the same time, you know, affording a certain level of clarity so that there's some consistency across the board. So it's an interesting, you know, tightrope to walk, where we want to make sure that the standards are clear enough and specific enough, but at the same time broad enough so
Broad
that
enough,
we
exactly.
can work within them, and that they don't become too constraining. And you know, I'm really looking forward to this work group and to you know, to refine what we have here, the starting place, and flesh out what we need to in the accreditation standards. It's exciting work, I think, and we want to do that collaboratively.
And I think so many changes are happening. We have to be right on top of it. You know, I mean, what we've seen, and well, being a homeopath for like 25 years, what I certainly saw 25 years ago and what we're seeing for patients now is a startling difference. Of course, you add the depth of perception as we get older. You know, I may be seeing things now I missed when I was younger, but yeah, we've got a lot of complications out there, and our students have to be ready for what's going on.
And
so it is
we
exciting.
haven't addressed student expectations, where homeopathy is not like any other profession. You don't complete your book, take your test, and launch.
Yeah, we're not a cookbook.
Yeah. And so, you know, as an educator, I let my students know that I went through school twice before I went into practice. And then I had guest lecturers come and teach for me. And a lot of them, in giving their origin stories, were like, yep, I went through school twice. As soon as I graduated my basic training, I did some training with, you know, we all know the teachers from around the world.
Sure.
So it's important for schools to be honest with their student bodies. And, you know, I made sure my students knew that I could not be their sole source of education.
Mhm.
And I hired as many guest lecturers as possible and then encouraged them to be mentored. So, you know, it's a push-pull. The student body is very important and very different. And it's the expectations of a student need to be molded from the beginning.
Agreed. Plus the different learning styles. So you know, it just adds another dimension of complication. But it's worth it.
Sarah, did you have a comment you were going to make? I thought you had your hand up earlier.
You mean me, Sarah?
You, Sarah?
I didn't. I
Oh,
didn't.
okay.
I
Okay.
mean, yeah, not related to the standards and competencies. So yeah.
I see Barbara does have her hand.
Okay. Yeah, Barb does.
Barb, you're muted. Barb, you're muted.
Are you able to unmute?
I am. I had to find my picture with the unmute button. So I just wanted to say for now, what we have is considered to be the final document
Yes, that's correct.
because few of us went through it again and we found 2.5 pages of things that are grammar still and some things maybe could be said. It's just sentences and stuff. So I guess we leave it at that for now, right?
Please document those. You know, this is going to get revised again. So.
Yeah, if I'm
please-
still alive.
Right. It's true for all of us. Yeah. But that time and effort is not wasted to have gone through it and said, well, we still think it could be better, you know?
Yeah, there's some little bit of weird things here and there, which we could probably do better.
And you know, and we can, whatever you find, we can address, we can make sure we don't make the same mistakes or oversights when we update the accreditation standards. So first one to point out, like I will tell you, I probably read the document 5 times. and every time I could review it, I could probably find something else. So, it's I think some of it is simply the scope of the document. And if at least we can identify things and strengthen the way that we translate this into the accreditation standards, that's a good thing. So thank you, Barbara. Absolutely.
Just a question. So the year you refer to Hahnemann is 1896. Is that the publishing of the Organon? I mean, he was dead at 1896.
I'm not sure. That's a good one.
And it's right in the beginning of the document.
Probably not something that we changed. That was probably from the.
He was born in 1755, and I think he died in 1842 or something like this. So, but that is, if we say that, then we need to say, Organon. And I don't know which was this before you guys corrected it. It said 1996. So it was corrected to 1896. But this is what I mean. There are little things in there that if we are educators and we want it to be perfectly okay, at least some of those statements are important. But I can look at this again as history of the document.
Okay.
I think that is, yeah. And all the new parts, new content seems very good compared to what it was. Question is, now there's new content in this document. So does that have to go through a public comment period again?
Well, so everything that's in this document went through a public comment period. Now,
Okay.
okay, so you're right in a certain sense that some of our response to the comments is new and hadn't been commented upon. That's actually accurate. So I have to take back what I said. But I think we're relying on the good intentions and knowledge and expertise of the deliberations committee that essentially sanctioned the current language that you see in front of us. And in terms of the ACHENA accreditation manual, then we will have a public comment period on the update of standard.
On the
8.
updated standards.
Yeah, and you heard
Yes.
from CHC that they will undergo a process of examining the work from this document and exploring how it would be applied in their work and whatever process CHC has for, community input or board input into that process that would happen. So this is a guide. Like I said, when you go back to what is the purpose of this? It's a guide. It's not it's not requirements, they're a guide.
Yeah, but like grammar and stuff is gonna stay the way it is, right?
You know,
For example, just a little thing, you may get yourself in trouble here, is that you list the software companies, but Radar is left out. So stuff like that, you know, I mean, either mention no one or mention them all, which are many more than what is in here. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of get a confirmation if this is the actual final document, because then I'm going to put this away for a while and look at it later.
if you
I've read
point
this
out
several times.
if you point
too.
out like specific errata, if you will, it is, I guess it is possible that like we could change a, you know, a date or something, and you know, without entering another public comment or changing something substantive, that we could correct an error or two. That seems like a reasonable thing. That doesn't seem unreasonable.
Okay.
Can I? Sorry. I was just gonna say, even though something is final, but I think it's all of our duty to make sure that there is nothing in there that is not correct. When I read through that also, I realized Radar or Radar Opus is not part of the software. And I like to believe it's just a mistake, because Radar is one of the most well-known software companies in North America. And why I'm surprised that nobody from Radar made that comment to them.
Yeah, right.
I like to believe that mistakes like this happen, and this is actually the perfect time for anybody who has read that and saw those mistakes or any error to add it to. So even though it is a final document in terms of content and context, but there's any mistakes has to be corrected as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But nothing is it's not a Bible that is eternal and no word can change.
There certainly was no intent to discriminate against Radar as a company or Radar Opus as a program. So thank you for those observations.
And certainly we could assemble an errata page where so that this can get fixed going forward, short-term, long-term, whenever term. We don't want to keep propagating errors. So anything anybody finds, we're glad to hear about it.
Good idea.
Okay.
So I'm noticing it is 8:59, which means we're like super right on time. Any final comments or thoughts?
Rick.
And McKay.
Hi, I just want to first of all say that I was involved in the 2010 summit and was editor for the 2013 document. And I was pleased to be part of the steering committee for this document and the revision as well. And I'm pleased to see that this final iteration got cleaned up a lot, because I was beside myself when I saw the first draft come out for it with all of the everybody's comments listed in there and trying to figure it all out. So thank you to everyone who helped to do that, as well as letting everyone know that this document serves as part of what the CHC uses for reaccreditation and accreditation of the credential. So it's a very important document in terms of the CHC and how it will be used moving forward once things are finally established. Right now, we just finished the reaccreditation process, and the 2013 document is being used. So the next reaccreditation, I'm sure, will be used for this 22 document, and then you'll be in the throes of doing another one, and I hope not to be involved with that one.
Thank you, Ann. Any other final comments? I do want to take a second just to thank Alistair Gray for his leadership in getting the steering committee started and all the hours that he put into this, and everyone on the steering committee and everyone on the deliberations committee, and as folks have said, everybody that took the time to slog through this and submit comments. And again, I hope that when we do this again, we'll continue to have increased participation and representation. And I think it's, from what I've heard from some of the earlier summits to sort of where we are now, that we are coming together as a community. We may not agree on everything, But I will say that the work of the deliberation committee was a pure joy. Like, we enjoyed being together. We enjoyed talking about this stuff. We came to agreement fairly readily on the issues, and we put aside, personal, desires or what have you to come together as a community. And I'm really proud of the work that this particular group has done, as I was the last time around. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and be well.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.